I want to begin tonight by turning on my microphone. Begin tonight by reading you a scripture. It's always been one of my favorites pertaining to mission work. It comes from the book of 3 John. It's not a book that we study very often. I'm going to go ahead and turn off this microphone. Verses 7 and 8. Word of God reads, accepting nothing from the Gentiles. Therefore we ought to support such people, so that we may prove to be fellow workers with the truth. Of course, mission work is part of the Great Commission. The Gospel of Mark, chapter 15 and 16 says, go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. Right? So go into all the world. And I'm privileged tonight to stand before you and give you an update on our work this year in June in the country of Vanuatu. I said it this morning, but I'll say it again tonight, just on behalf of myself, Reed, and Madison. Thank you so much for your support. As our congregation that has supported us going down there, we appreciate it very much. And so thank you for financially supporting us, and especially thank you for your prayers. And my involvement with the country of Vanuatu actually goes back all the way to 2004, 2005. When I was a student at the Bear Valley Bible Institute in Denver, Colorado, we befriended a couple of families, Aaron and Cindy Baker and Eric and Shonda Brandale. And one of the teachers at the school there had done mission work in Vanuatu and had seen a need for some full-time workers of the Churches of Christ to go into Vanuatu and help the church become more established there. I'll say this again in a little bit, but the first Church of Christ missionaries didn't really make it to this part of the world until after World War II. So you think about the Cawson Street congregation being established in 1942, I believe it was. It wasn't until some 20 years later that the first Church of Christ missionaries even made it into this part of the world. And so it wasn't until the late 1960s and the early 1970s that you even had the first baptized believers in the country of Vanuatu. Now there were other missionary groups, and we'll point out some of those in a little bit, but I think it's important for us to keep that in mind, because while Christianity has been something that was a part of this country since really the founding, the very beginning of this country, Vanuatu, that wasn't the case, but it certainly is now. And again, I'll bring that up a little bit more later on. But going back to 2005, these two families, along with a single man whose name is Mike Olson, decided to move down to Vanuatu and to live there for 5 years. And they originally committed to 5 years. Mike Olson and Aaron and Cindy Baker ended up staying there a total of almost 8 years, whereas Eric and Shonda Brandale ended up staying there almost 15 years. Eric and Shonda went on to adopt two Ni Vanuatu. If you are from Vanuatu and you are of the Vanuatu people, they're called Ni Vanuatu people. And so they adopted two Ni Vanuatu children, Titus and Grayson. They have since relocated back to the States and live in Oklahoma. A couple of weeks after we went down to Vanuatu, Eric and Shonda were able to make their a trip back to Vanuatu, their first time since the pandemic, actually since leaving Vanuatu several years ago. And so I have had an on and off again involvement in mission work going all the way back to 2005. Our church that we planted in the Pacific Northwest supported Eric and Shonda and their mission work down there. And then in 2010, I was invited to come down. And so I did. I lived in Seattle at the time, and I went to Vanuatu on my first mission trip, and I loved it. And I really felt a connection to that place. I felt a connection to the people there and to the work there. And I really felt a sense of burden. And what I mean by that is there are places in the world, Africa, Central America, where mission work happens all the time. And this isn't to say that we shouldn't be sending people to Africa or we shouldn't be sending people to Central America. It's only to say that because of the distance, because of how much it takes to get there, and we'll go over that in a few minutes, not many members of the Church of Christ have done mission work in the South Pacific. And so because God opened a door and gave me the opportunity to go there, I feel a burden to continue to do this work. In fact, this was my 4th trip, the one that I just went on. And it's something that if God wills, I'll go as many times for the rest of my life as I can. I've sort of committed myself to learning the language of Bislama. And I shouldn't have told the people of Vanuatu that. It's kind of weird. It's a third world country, but they're very fluent on Facebook. And so they're messaging me in Bislama. They won't answer me back in English. I'll read it and I'll say, hey, how's it going? And then they'll say something in Bislama like, you're going to talk the language. You said you wanted to do this. Now show up, right? So it's kind of, it's encouraging to me to see people on the other side of the planet saying, all right, brother, you said you're going to do this. Are you really going to do it? And so one of the things that I would like to do in Vanuatu is to see the church become more established in my lifetime. It takes a lot of work. Not one Church of Christ in all of the country of Vanuatu has a preacher. Not one Church of Christ in all of the country of Vanuatu has an eldership. And so the churches in Vanuatu are still in a very fledgling state. That's not to say that they're helpless. One of the things that's very different about the kind of mission work that we do in Vanuatu compared to a lot of the other mission trip presentations that you're going to see is we don't do hardly any benevolence. We did some, and I'll talk about that a little bit. But usually what we do when we go down there, it's focused on teaching the gospel and strengthening the church that's down there. There are needs that come up from time to time. The sense of poverty that you see in places like Honduras and Guatemala, it's just not the same sense in Vanuatu. It's really hard to describe. They live in huts. They don't have electricity or running water. And in every way, when you're in the village, and I'll make a distinction between in the city and in the village in a little bit, when you're in the village, you almost feel like they're better off than we are, even though we have all of these lights and these buildings. And some of that just goes down to the way of life, the way that they choose to live compared to the way that we choose to live here. So in June of this year, we went to Vanuatu, Reed, Saylor, and Madison and I. And there's one question that everybody always asks about Vanuatu. I'm getting ahead of myself. What I meant to tell you at the beginning of this was, at the end of my presentation, I've asked Reed if he would like to come up and say a few words, give his account, and then I'm actually going to open it up if there's any questions that you might have at the end of this. And so kind of be thinking through this and prepare this for the end of the presentation. All right, back to what I said. The one question that everybody, at least in the United States, asks is this: where in the world is Vanuatu, right? How many of you, when you heard, hey, they're going to Vanuatu, you're like, I don't even know where that is? See, I say, there's an honest, Kathy's honest over there. I don't know where Vanuatu is. Like I've heard people go, wasn't that like on an episode of Survivor? Yes, it was. Survivor took place one season in Vanuatu. Most people didn't even know it was a country. That just tells you our knowledge of Vanuatu. So let me show you where Vanuatu is. Here's a regional map. It's close to a country that I think most of us have heard of, Australia. Have you heard of Australia? Okay. All right, everybody's heard of Australia. Okay, that's probably the closest large country. And I know it's a little hard to see that, but off to the east of Vanuatu, a few hundred miles, is Fiji. And that's actually the first step of your journey. Going from LA, you land in Fiji, and you fly into Nandi, Fiji. And even though the people are similar to the people in Vanuatu, the people of Fiji and their culture is a little bit different. And then to the south is, of course, New Zealand. And if you watch Lord of the Rings or anything like that, everybody wants to go to New Zealand nowadays, right? And it's a beautiful country. They call those people from New Zealand Kiwis, and I've known a few Kiwis in my life, and they were wonderful, wonderful people. But Vanuatu is an island nation that is to the north of New Zealand, to the west of Fiji, and to the east of Australia, made up of about 83 islands. Not all of those 83 islands is inhabited. And so here is the country of Vanuatu. Kind of gives you the picture of all of those islands that's scattered out from north to south along that stretch of islands that makes up the country of Vanuatu. There's another series of islands to the north that make up the Solomon Islands, which is another country. And interestingly, an elder in the church in Texas who supported us, that church supported us in Pacific Northwest, he and that congregation have taken a serious interest in spreading the gospel throughout the Solomon Islands. And the situation in the Solomons is very similar to the situation in Vanuatu, a fledgling church that needs to continue to grow and be established. But if you're looking at the screen there, you'll see kind of down in the middle of the map, right there where the lowest airplane is, where it says Port Vila there, that's the capital of Vanuatu. Port Vila is the capital of Vanuatu, and the island that Port Vila is on is called Efate Island. Now in Port Vila, it's fairly modern. You'd feel like you were mostly back home if you're there. There's running water, electricity, there's a lot of tourists and touristy things. But once you get outside of Port Vila, maybe 20 minutes driving distance outside of Port Vila, you go to third world country where there's no running water, there's no electricity. It's starting to grow a little bit on the main island, but other places, other islands in Vanuatu is still very much what you and I would consider third world. I hesitate to use a term like third world because oftentimes our idea of what third world is shaped by, again, things happening in Central America or Africa. It is third world. It doesn't have any kind of running water or any kind of electricity or anything like that other than solar power. However, food is abundant in Vanuatu. You can plant a dead stick in the ground and something will grow on it. And most of that comes from volcanic soil. That they can grow just about anything down there. And their gardens are lush and amazing and beautiful in Vanuatu. And there's fairly almost no crime throughout the whole country of Vanuatu. And so there's no gangs or any of the things that plague the Central American countries, which really drive down the impoverished and the livability ratings of those countries. That kind of stuff just doesn't exist. So if I say third world, kind of take it with a grain of salt for the remainder of this presentation. So if you go south of Port Vila, you'll see the country or the island of Aramango, and then just south of Aramango is Tanna. And this is where in 2010 we planted the church on Tanna Island, Vanuatu, when 8 people were baptized. And that church has grown well on Tanna Island. It's grown from one congregation that was established in Lower Cal Village to 4 congregations at Lower Cal Village, Lone Village, Yatakun Village, and then Green Point Village. We had the chance to visit 3 of those 4 villages on our trip, and I'll tell you some more about that in just a little bit. But to zoom in even further on Tanna Island, if you can see that white diamond that I placed in the middle of the island right there, that's where we stayed for a little over a week, or right about a week, where we taught the Pacific Island Bible College classes. And so to get to Tanna Island, you actually have to take a flight from Port Vila to White Sands or Whitegrass Airport on Tanna Island, and then ride in the back of a truck until you get there. And it's quite the trip. It's quite the trip to get all the way to Tanna Island to teach in the church there. All right, let me tell you just real quick some facts about Vanuatu. I love this picture. One of the sisters, Margaret, had a little baby, and just precious. Here's some facts about Vanuatu. Vanuatu just gained their independence from the UK and France in 1980. So they're a fairly young country. I didn't tell you this, but their motto is, "Long God we stand up," which means, with God we stand. Now, who does that sound like? In God we trust. And in a lot of ways, Vanuatu, aside from some significant cultural differences, in a lot of ways, religiously, Vanuatu reminds me of the United States of America back in the 1700s and 1800s, where there was a religious fervency that is taking place in the country. In Vanuatu, you're allowed to go to the marketplace and openly preach, and people will listen. All day in Linikel on Tanna Island, there's people from various Christian groups that are preaching the gospel and teaching people about Jesus on Tanna Island. And so there's a very real sense in which the people of Vanuatu will tell you, we are striving to be a Christian country. That's what they're trying to be. very different from the United States of America in 2023, where religiously we don't even know who we are anymore. But in Vanuatu, these people look at Christianity as a blessing that has been brought to them, and they're eager to explore it and to know it more. So it gained independence in 1980. It's a unitary parliamentary republic. That is to say, it's very much like a Western democracy. It is a democracy. There's no dictatorship in Vanuatu. They have a president. They have a prime minister. The total population, 2023, is about 310,000, maybe a little bit more than that. In 98% of the country, so this is not a very racially or ethnically diverse country, 98.5% of the country is Ni Vanuatu people. And the first time that I saw people from Vanuatu, I was actually very surprised at how African they looked. Their mannerisms and their habits did not remind me of people that I'd met from Africa, but how they looked very much reminded me of that. And I asked them the question, I said, how did you get to these islands? And nobody really knows, but the story is that they were part of a group of seafaring people called the Lapita people. Going all the way back 3,000 years ago, the Lapita people made this seafaring migration from Africa, and they kind of went along that southern area, below India, and they just kept moving along. They weren't fighters, they weren't necessarily warriors, they were sort of more of a peace-going people, and so they kept just migrating until they found places where they could settle down and be peaceful, and that's how those people came into the islands of Vanuatu to begin with. And now 98.5% of the country is Ni Vanuatu, so there's a very small percentage of people from other countries that live there. Notably, 93.5% of people in Vanuatu will claim some kind of Christianity. Now, I just told you that the Church of Christ just came into the country in the late 1960s, early 1970s. Well, there were some groups that got there first before we did. Notably, of those countries, the Catholics, the Mormons are heavily, heavily involved in Vanuatu. For every one of Mike, there's 20 Mormon missionaries going into this place. Now here's a little, why? Why are the Mormons so invested in the South Pacific? Well, did you know that the Mormons believed in the lost tribes of Israel? That's a teaching they have within the Mormonism. And there's a teaching within Mormonism that says that one of those lost tribes is in the South Pacific. And when they find and convert those lost tribes, well, then Jesus is going to come back. And so they invest very heavily in these places. But there are other groups, such as the Assemblies of God and the Seventh-day Adventists. Now, Vanuatu is a major hub of East-West political tensions. And that's because of the influence of China. One of the biggest changes from 2010 to 2023 is the investment of China in Vanuatu. And I won't get into all of that. This is a missionary update, but there are serious geopolitical forces that are fighting for the Ni Vanuatu people and trying to influence them, and it seems very, very obvious, and it is having an impact on the church. So let's talk about for just a minute what it's like doing mission work in Vanuatu. This picture is probably going to make you laugh a little bit. So if you can't ride like that, hanging on for dear life for about an hour, you probably shouldn't go to Vanuatu. And somebody's like, well, where's Reed? I don't know how he swung this, but notice his hand behind Madison's head back there. That's Reed. He got to sit in the truck. So I don't know what you did, Reed, to earn that one in the truck, but that's the whole mission team that we had, and that's how you get around on Tanna Island. Is you call the truck driver, he'll get to you when he feels like it. It's island time, you're on his time, right? If he says, I'll be there soon may be 2 hours. If you're in a hurry, why are you there, is what they're saying. Why are you here if you're busy and in a hurry, right? And so you throw all your bags in the back of a truck and you head out. But it is there is a commitment that goes into this mission work. 10 different airplanes is how many airplanes that Madison and Reed and I rode. We spent about 38 hours on an airplane just to get to Tanna Island and back. That's equivalent of almost a full work week. So people are like, why do you go for 2 weeks? Well, now you know. Do you want to sit on a plane for 38 hours for 1 week of work? No way. It takes a good 2 weeks just to get the money's worth, it feels like. 2 weeks away from home. Logistics is a big part of any missionary effort, and it's really no different with this one. You don't think about all of the planning that goes into that. The guy sitting with his hand on his chin, Aaron Baker and Cindy, I'll talk more about them in just a few minutes. They put in a lot of the legwork. They speak the language. They lived there for 7 years. But, there's so many things that has to be planned out. Everything from the hotels that we stay in, when we get to Vanuatu, when we're on the main island, the commercial flight or the domestic air flight that goes down to Tanna, reaching out to the people of Tanna and sort of coordinating as you can by Facebook or cell phone text messages to let them know that we're coming. When we get to Vanuatu, going to the grocery store, buying all of the supplies and getting everything that we can. Just simply planning the trip is a lot of work in and of itself. And then when you get to Vanuatu, when you're on Efate Island, and the way that we do it on these trips when we go down there is we'll spend the first couple of days in Efate doing the logistical things I just mentioned, getting ready for the trip to Tanna Island. And it feels very much almost like being a tourist, because you're staying in a hotel room and you're shopping in a marketplace, you're eating in the restaurants that's down on the waterfront and things of that nature. But it's very, very different when you get to Tanna. When you get to Tanna, we live like the locals live. They give us one of their houses, they give up one of their kitchens, their people cook for us, and we eat what they eat. And so the average meal for us is a big piece of root crop, think giant sweet potato, okay, served over rice that is made into sort of like a soup, and that soup will take some ramen noodles and some island cabbage and then a big plate of it. I mean, like a heaping plate of that kind of food, and that's what you'll eat. The main dish is called lap lap, and lap lap is when they take that same root crop. Madison got the experience of making lap lap, and they'll basically shred it and mash it up with coconut milk, and then Reed and I got the chance to build the fires. They'll put it inside banana leaves, and then they'll put it on top of these hot coals, and they'll cook it for hours, and it becomes like, I don't even know how to describe it. It's like a, how would you describe it, Reed? You can't, right? It's lap lap, It's just like a gooey, not gooey though, there's a firm texture to it, and they eat it all the time. And that's what you eat. So they'll make that, and you'll eat that. Now, obviously, when you're coming from an American culture, they don't have Pop-Tarts and toaster strudels and English muffins for breakfast. And so we eat breakfast crackers with peanut butter and coffee. That's our breakfast, because they just eat whatever root crop was left from the night before. So here's my point. For most of the mission trip when we're down there, and probably one of the hardest things for people to adjust to, and this is where coming from our culture and going down there is challenging, is you live according to the way they live, which is very different from the way that we live. You eat food that's very different. You sleep very different. You go to bed with the chickens. You wake up with the poo-poos, which is a trumpet. Okay, that's what they call a trumpet. I'll tell you more about that in a second. You live the village life. There's no, you stay at a hotel room and then you come into work for a little bit and then you go back and stay in a hotel room and eat your Western food. No. You live like they live when you go to Vanuatu, including the toilet, okay? Which is my least favorite part of the whole village experience. Cockroaches and a hole in the ground. I'll just leave it at that, okay? That's because that's what you got. That's what you got. I'll tell you a funny story real quick. I was standing here. I got up early one morning before I taught, and I decided that I was going to get a bath, a shower, which is a bucket of cold water. You lather up, and then you right on top of you. That's how you get a shower. So I'm standing there, and I'm a little taller than the average Ni Vanuatu person is. So I start to lather up, and I hear people come around, and there's about 3 or 4 Ni Vanuatu young ladies. And they're from here to Madison for me, and I'm like, good morning. In my mind, I'm thinking, privacy, please. In their mind, they're thinking, what are you doing, white man? Just take your bath and get on with it. This is what you do in Vanuatu in the village. And so, They're looking at me like, why is he being cautious? This is the way that we get baths down here. He should know this by now. And so I very quickly dumped the bucket of water on my head and got out of there because, look, I'll just be honest with you. It's very awkward to get a shower when there's 3 Vanuatu teenagers 5 feet from you. And one time a chicken came and grabbed the blanket and pulled it open. So then I was... So you live in the village when you go to Vanuatu. You live in the village when you go to Vanuatu. A big part of our work that we do in Vanuatu is with the Pacific Island Bible College, which is overseen by the elders of the Forest Park Church of Christ in Atlanta, Georgia. And the Pacific Island Bible College is committed to teaching the Bible throughout the South Pacific region. They have several full-time missionaries who go to the various islands, American Samoa and Vanuatu, Fiji, Solomon Islands, the various other small islands scattered throughout the South Pacific, just to try to encourage the churches that do exist there and to plant more churches. And so Aaron and I are committed to going pretty much every year and teaching, as long as God makes it available to us, these Pacific Island Bible College lessons. And it's a real commitment because the people who live in Vanuatu, when they come to these classes, they will commute to the village where we are teaching the classes, and they'll live like we do for a week. They'll live off the hospitality of the members of the church in that village. And this time around, I taught the book of Isaiah, which worked out nicely because I just finished teaching Isaiah here at Cawson Street. And Aaron taught the book of Hebrews. But they'll be in class from about 8 o'clock in the morning until about 3:30 in the afternoon. And so it's a pretty big commitment for the entire time that we are there. And so I was proud, and this is the most students I ever had. I had 30 students who took the test, 30 students who took it, and every single one of them passed. Some of them couldn't even speak a lick of English, and so they were hearing it through translators and things of that nature. But they sat there for the entire time, and they studied and listened. And in addition to teaching the Pacific Island Bible College classes, a lot of the work... it reminds me very much of local work in the United States, except there's a different culture that you're working in. I'll give you an example. As soon as the truck pulled up to Lone Village and we got out of the back of the truck, Abu Yatta's widow came out and she was just crying. I mean, it was like, boom, the work starts. Here's a woman and she just needs to be comforted. Abu Yatta was a leader in the church there, and he'd recently passed away, and his widow was just sad. And she saw us, and it triggered loss. And so there was a lot of that, sitting with people. People had Bible questions, and you're answering their Bible questions, just marital questions, and all kinds of things that very much remind me of just like doing local work as a minister in the United States. All right, so on this particular trip, I want to get through these slides so I can give Reed a chance to say what he'd like to say and give you a chance to ask some questions. Here's the things we did on this trip. Here's the Pacific Island Bible College classes that we taught there in Tanna. That's the church building there in Lone Village in Tanna. And some of the students that were sitting in the class there. And we had students from as young as 16-year-old all the way up to in their 60s. And so it's a broad range of students that we'll teach. Almost all of them were Christian, although we did have a couple of people that took some classes this time around that were not Christian, and one particular young lady was extremely bright and smart. And so I'm hoping that she can get baptized. Reed went along on this trip, and one of the things that Reed was asked to do was to put forward some lessons to encourage the men. And so in that top right picture that you see there, that's actually the kitchen, and where you see the men sitting back there, that was where we had all of our meals. So that's in Vanuatu, you'll have your kitchen where they'll cook their food over an open fire, and then where you eat will be in the same structure. And Reed did an excellent job. I'll talk more about Reed in just a second, but one of the men of the village there actually responded at the end of a singing that we had, a sing-sing. And he just Reed's lessons got John thinking about his life, and he said, you know, I haven't been the man that I need to be. I haven't been the husband that I need to be. I need to step up for this church. I need to step up for this village. I need to step up for my family. And he was visibly in tears. And that was, I'm sure, in no small part because of the excellent lessons that Reed put together. And then in the bottom right down there is Aaron Baker teaching in the book of Hebrews. In addition to teaching the Bible classes, a big part of the work down here was to strengthen and encourage the church And it didn't just involve meeting with the churches. The picture to the left there is a combination of all of the Christians that got together on Tanna Island. It was a combination of meeting with the churches that were there, the church in Port Vila, the church in Laon. We took a trip down to the top right picture to the church that met in Green Point, about an hour truck drive, and encouraged them. We went to as many possible individual Christians and met with them that we could. The bottom right picture, Sam and Leimawa, some Christians that live out from Port Vila on Afate Island. There were other pictures that I just couldn't put them all here. It was a very, very, very busy time. We spent from really the whole trip was filled up with doing personal work and teaching the Bible, for which I was very, very grateful. And then one of the other favorite parts of the trip is just working together. You have great relationships with these people in the United States, and then you go to a place like Vanuatu, and you live in a village together, and you sleep 2 feet from them, and you learn that Reed snores and stuff like that. And he does, especially when he's really tired. You get to take your children on a trip like this, and it just deepens your commitment and love of those people. And so, there's a real sense in which mission work builds some really tight bonds, and for that I'm grateful as well. All right, let me share with you just a few of my favorite pictures of the trip, and then I'll turn it over to Reed for just a minute. I took this picture of the Milky Way. Can you believe that? That was looking straight up at the Milky Way from Tanna Island on my iPhone, and because of the projector, it's not even as bright as it actually was. It was absolutely beautiful. It just reminded me of Psalm 19, the heavens declare the glory of God. This is Montana, right here. Montana. Let me tell you about Montana. You might think that's a funny name, Montana. That's actually a great honor. Because when Reed got down there and he got into the village, some of the men came up and they said, "He's like us. He's Montana. He's from here." Right? And so Reed just sort of fed, the truck broke down from the Whitegrass Airport to where we were staying. Reed wandered off in the village and came back with a coconut and is smashing it open. And we're presenting a gift to the village chief. And suddenly this fire begins to billow smoke. And I'm like, what is wrong with this fire? Where's all this smoke coming from? Reed's throwing green leaves into this fire. Reed was just a great asset on this particular trip. And really, if you know anything about Reed at all, Reed is excellent with children. And so that picture right there shouldn't come as any kind of surprise to you at all. I snapped that one night at a Sing Sing. The kids just loved them. But there was another person of Tanna that was down there, girl Tanna. It's not easy being a woman and going into the village. It's just not. For a lot of reasons that I won't get into, it's a lot more challenging for women to go down there than it is for the men to go down there. And I took this picture one night as Madison and Misswell were having a draw-off. Misswell and Madison were trying to draw flowers, and another young girl came up and started to draw one, and they were looking after her. But I was blessed with both Reed and Madison on this trip. They took everything in stride. And they represented God well, and the people of Vanuatu loved them for it. And so there's just the beauty of God's children in a place like Vanuatu. Madison really bonded with the girls, and I enjoyed the top picture, sharing things happening back home. I was showing pictures of Noah in his army suit, right? And people in Vanuatu, they had no concept of what it's like in the in the U.S. They'll say things like, "Do you know Arnold Schwarzenegger?" Like, no. So you'll be showing them pictures of Noah in his military gear. Does he know Chuck Norris? No, he doesn't know Chuck Norris. No, but they look at him and they think, that's serious. He's got a uniform and a gun. That's serious, So I'm showing them these pictures, and they're all like, I turn around, there's 10, 15 people behind me like, ooh, I bet he knows Chuck Norris. It's just funny. It's just funny. And I can't speak enough about Aaron and Cindy Baker in the bottom right and their two daughters, Kayla and Malia. They just embody the best of Christianity and the spirit of Christianity. They're so generous. They're so giving. They've immersed themselves into this language. And if it wasn't for them and people like them, I would never be in Vanuatu. And to see them work and to see the amount of time and effort. I snapped this picture. The four of them had not been back to that building that they're standing in front of since they left it. They came there and lived for an entire year, actually a year and a half, on Tanna Island, and were instrumental in establishing the church in that place. Just to let you know the kind of clout that Aaron had just in the time that he was there. When we were over there presenting our gift to the village chief, we gave them basically $550 to help with the road, and we gave them $550 to help with the water problem. And the village chief was not a member of the church. He's actually an elder in the Presbyterian church. So we weren't sure how that was going to go. And when Aaron first came to Tanna, he basically said, "We don't want you here. We want you to leave. We don't need you here." And Aaron persisted in the work that was there. We came out of our houses the next day, and the entire village was standing there. They had brought food. They had brought chickens. They had brought mats. And they presented these things, and they basically said, "Look, we're giving you this to say thank you. It means a lot to us that you would do this." And that just goes to show how the persistence of a Christ-like spirit makes a big difference in the lives of people around the world. And so, again, I just want to thank you for the mission trip that you supported. Us going down to Vanuatu, it did a lot for Madison and Reed and I in terms of encouraging us. And I know it did a lot for the church in Vanuatu. It's hard for me to explain, but it always feels like I go there trying to bless them, but somehow they bless me more than I could ever imagine. They're just such a giving and wonderful people, and God is working through them. I found it very interesting. I was talking to them about COVID. This is the last thing I'm going to say, and I'm going to turn it over to Reed for a minute. I was asking them about COVID, and I said, "How many people got sick and died? How many people would you think got sick and died in Vanuatu from COVID?" Zero. Zero. It was amazing to me. It was, I don't, they should study that. For now in my heart, I feel like it's a God thing. I feel like God took care of them. I'm going to turn over to Reed for just a minute, and then I'll step back up here and see if you got any questions. Reed?
Thanks, Mike. So just to clarify a couple things. Number one, the reason I was in the truck was because no one wanted to sit inside the truck. Because it was such a beautiful ride, seeing the scenery. And number two, it was a free roller coaster ride. Because it was hanging on for dear life, and it was a great time. Number two, the bathrooms we had a luxury one because we had a toilet made out of concrete. It was they made a concrete toilet, so some said it was good, some said it was bad, but anyways, we had that. And the reason why I put the leaves on the fire was because, just in case the chief got mad at us, we had to have a getaway. So it's going to be a smoke screen because we'd be able to blend in really well. Not really, but anyways. No, I really appreciate the time and the chance to go down to Vanuatu this past summer and in June. I put in my notes it was an amazing trip, but that really words can't really explain or do justice. As the people were amazing, seeing a different part of God's creation each day, the stars at night that you saw Mike taking a picture of, and just the fellowship with Christians that spoke a different language, had a different culture, a style of life, but they're so generous, so kind, and there really are no words to describe them. They're a type of people where you just have to be there, to experience it and to see what they're like. Mike alluded to this earlier. Our time on Tanna started out with a bang. It was more of a pop with the tire. The flat tire was a couple miles outside of the airport, so I did what any redneck would do. I started walking down a dirt road. And we did. We found there were 4 or 5 of us. We found a couple coconuts, and I busted them open. We found out later, though, that they really weren't good to drink or eat out of. I learned there that brown coconuts are kind of bad, and the green ones are the ones you want. A guy named Miswell, I got to go down with him to his garden, and he took a big long pole and popped a couple of coconuts off, and I asked him, I said, why didn't you climb the tree? He said, my back hurts. So he said that. Him and I really appreciated his camaraderie and getting to know him. He's a real good guy. Life in the village was wonderful. It was great to me. It's different in so many ways, from the showers, to Mike said, and to using the facilities. It's probably what life was like probably 100 or a couple hundred years ago in the United States. It's a lot different than what we're used to. And maybe everyone can go back to that lifestyle if all the computers became non-existent, which I don't think would be a bad thing, and one could only dream about that, right? There were a lot fewer distractions. No TVs, no video games, no cell phones. Well, they were there. They worked once in a while. I had trouble getting calls out and texts out. There was 2 or 3 days where I tried calling Lauren just to say hi, let her know I was okay, and I couldn't get a call out, couldn't get a text out, but it all worked out. It was definitely a different lifestyle, and one in which it'd be tough for some, but enjoyable for others. The people in the village, again, words don't do them justice. They're so kind and so loving. Like Mike said, we had 2 different families that just totally gave up their homes for a week and let the guy stayed in one home and the girl stayed in another. They cooked for us and fed us every day. We worshiped together, sang songs in English and some in Bislama. And I'm just going to do a real short clip. I won't try to sing it, just so you guys can just listen to, see if it comes up. That's about a 5-minute clip, but for time's sake, I'll just stop it there. But every night, save for one, I wasn't feeling the best, so I went to bed early. But I fell asleep listening to the beautiful songs and the music, the songs and the singing from the Ni Vanuatu people, and it was a blessing. Every night we got to sing and be encouraged through song. Definitely a blessing to talk with and interact with and teach some of the people. Like Mike said, I was able to lead 3 devotional sessions with some of the men from the church. Talked about being the spiritual leader of the household the first day. We spoke about loving your wife in a godly way the second day. And the third day, working with and leading their kids, not embittering their kids. I got to say there was one negative of the trip, and that was that my wife, Lauren, and our 3 pickaninnies, that's what they call kids in Bislama, they weren't there. But it was a wonderful time. I'd like to thank you guys for the financial support and the prayers. It's definitely a trip that was challenging, but yet very, very encouraging. Lord willing, I can go back. Excuse me. And see some of the great people there. Thank you.
I appreciate Reed's words. Obviously, it's very emotional experience. You go down there and you experience something like that. It's just really hard to put into words when they open themselves up to you so much and they do so much for you. It's just a beautiful thing, and I think Reed's words were very wise. You know, you just have to experience it. You know, there's a love and there's a appreciation that they have that would
do this country well. And it's kind of a shame that you got to go to a little island in the middle of the South Pacific to really experience it. I'm glad that Reed and Madison got to experience it. But I want to take an opportunity, since you did have a commitment into this mission trip, to open it up for some questions. There's probably hours worth of more other things that I'd like to say to you. But if there's any questions tonight, I'd like to try to answer them to the best of my ability before our time is up. Ms. Carla. They do, yeah. And actually, that's one of the things that we decided to do when we were down there. We got down there, and their Bibles were pitiful, and their songbooks were pitiful. The songbook that they have was created by the mission team that went down there, and so they just took some songs that were out of print, and they created them. They translated them and had them printed up. And so two things that we were able to do that was a definite need was, one, get some Bibles to the Christians in Tana. So we went to the Bible bookstore back in Port Vila, and we bought 2 cases of Bibles, and we packaged them up. And the day before we left the country, we went down to the airport, and we sent it to them, and we found out that they've got them. And so they disseminated, I think it was like 40 or 50 Bibles that we bought. And then I have since found out that they had a stash of extra songbooks that were sent down to Tana Island, and they're going to replenish their songbook supply as well. That's just one of the things that they can't get. But yeah, they have the Bible Translation Society of the Pacific is what it's called, created a Bible in Bislama. It's about that thick because they have 11,000 words in their language, and we have 24,000. So it takes them a lot longer to say something in Bislama than it does in English. But good question. Anybody else? Ms. Connie.
There are a lot of different islands made up in Vanuatu. Has the gospel reached all of the church on all the islands?
No.
And are there plans to grow further to the other islands?
Yeah, absolutely. That's God plans. So there, of the islands, there's 83 islands, and there's about 10 that have churches. There's by churches, there's one island that has one man that's a Christian. He's the only Christian on the whole island, and so he just worships by himself. Malakula Island, and then Espiritu Santo have a couple of larger churches. But other than us going in there and the workers from the Pacific Island Bible College, there's not a lot. Now, I will say this, Connie, one of the things I was really encouraged by the church in Tana was, towards the end of the week, they said, how do we grow the church and make it bigger? And God is blessing them organically. They are having lots of children. And so one of the things that I emphasized was start by teaching these children. I said, just imagine if you led all of these children to the faith, where the church would be in a generation. But then we also talked about how to get the gospel to other places as well. They don't do a lot of traveling. And I'll be honest, one of the Western influences that's pulling a lot of the younger men away is the opportunity to travel to Australia and work in the, they call them plantations there, but they're basically just orchards and stuff like that. They'll work there and work for a season and come back because they can make more money in Australia in a season than they could in 10 years in Vanuatu. And so, unfortunately, what happens is you lose men. Young working age men will go. So there's the pull of affluence that is a challenge as well. Good question, though. Thank you. Anybody else? Well, pray. Obviously, you can pray. I think you could continue to work and support people who go down into Vanuatu. If you're willing to go on a trip. Now, it's not for the weak or faint of heart. It's just not. I mean, it's not for everybody. I'll be honest with you. It's just, you know, if you have health problems or something like that, you really just don't want to go down to Vanuatu. You can go to Port Vila, but it's hard to go down to the village. It's just a very difficult style of life. It's not for everybody. But to just go and go on a trip down there and support the brethren that's down there. mainly just pray, man. God is doing things in that country. God is doing things with the brethren in that country that, the tears, from Reed and I and Madison, is they served us, it felt like, more than we served them. And it's a godly spirit that's at work. Just pray that the church there grows and God can bring up some elders and some growth in that country. But I'll think about it some more.
Mission team was talking about trying to put some clothing together for me.
Sure. Yeah. One of the things that we did was, and I didn't mention this, but at the end of the week, we took all of the clothing that we took with us, most of the clothing we took with us, the air mattresses we took with us, and then we divided them up among the 3 congregations that were there, and we gave them out. And they will use all of those things. Now, I will say one of the things that we're trying to do in Vanuatu is to not make them dependent on Western support. We want them to be as independent as possible. And so that's why when we go there, we don't go there, bringing a ton of rice and, all of these goodies and things of that nature, because they are people just like us. And if you go down there and they get used to you doing, they'll become dependent on that. And we want the church to be as independent as possible there. But putting together and you want to help, right? That's why you're saying that. And that's the way that we think of helping and things of that nature. I'd say probably one of the best things you could do is you just be aware and be involved. You know what I mean? If you're on Facebook, go onto my friends list and befriend some of the Christians that you see from Vanuatu and communicate with them. They could talk in English. If you say something in English, they will, unless they want you to speak Bislama, and then they'll just refuse to speak in English to you. But I'll think some more about it and let you know, Matt. Thank you for asking. I appreciate it. Anybody else? All right. I appreciate your attention tonight. I appreciate your again, support for this. I appreciate you, Reed, and appreciate Madison, you two going on this trip. It was just a real special experience that we'll cherish for the rest of our lives. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to, I think we're going to have a song, and then during the singing of this song, if you could please. How many more songs do we got? Two? Okay, after the singing of this song, then we're going to, if you haven't had a chance to take communion tonight, you can head back to the multi-purpose room.
I just thought, is this on? Yes, it is, I think. Yeah. I just thought this might be a good opportunity. While we're talking about missions, this might be a good idea to update some information from this morning. And secondly, as I was listening to all this, I was reminded of a couple of passages of Scripture that I've had the opportunity to teach in the adult auditorium class over the last couple or 3 weeks. I think, Terry, let's make sure I get the amount correct. The amount for the special contribution this morning was $1,878. Is that right, Terry? Okay, so again, the offering was $1,878 for, tell me the brother's name one more time. Brother Rimberto in the Honduras. I want you to know this. Your elders continue to be so thankful and so remarkably impressed with the generosity of this congregation here. That's been true through the years for as long as I can remember being here, as long as I've been here, which is 51 years now. Your generosity is just remarkable, and your generosity not only helps Brother Rimberto, and the final figures on that were, we thought he needed about $2,000, I think, and as of this morning, I think we confirmed that maybe $1,070 or so had been contributed. So, just here, and I think 3 Chop was doing the same thing. That it's more than he might need, but I'm not sure that the cost will end up being $2,000. So we'll think about exactly. Your elders will talk about that Tuesday night. We'll make sure we make up what he needs for the surgery, the testing, and so forth. But we'll see where we go with the rest of that. And that reminded me of a passage of Scripture again from Ephesians chapter 4, which we again studied in the adult class, I think, last week. Ephesians 4:28 says this. It's a part of a passage that the latter chapters of Ephesians instruct us Christians, on how we're to live. And Ephesians 4:28 says this: "Let him who stole steal no more, but rather let him labor, working with his hands what is good." But notice what the rest of the verse says: "That he may have something to give him who has need." You know, we're so remarkably blessed in this country. I mean, it's the physical blessings that we have in this country. Almost all of us have good jobs, well-paying jobs. You look at the amount of wealth that we have compared to places like Vanuatu or the Honduras or Guatemala, and it's just, well, there is no comparison. We're so remarkably blessed. And so that's how we're to use this blessing. Working with his hands what is good, that he may have something to give him who has need. Okay? That allows us to support Mike and Reed and Madison and others as they go to Vanuatu. It allows us to support Rachel and Hope as they give of their time to go to the Honduras, and Rachel's been to Guatemala many times or whatever. And then it reminded me of a passage we will discuss next week in my class, in chapter 5. Ephesians 5 and verse 16 in the New King James says, "Redeeming the time, because the days are evil." Actually, verse 15 says, "See that you walk circumspectly," and that really means walk carefully. Okay? Not as fools, but as wise. Redeeming the time, because the days are evil. And redeeming the time, other translations I think are going to say, make the most of your opportunity, make the most of your time, or whatever. And so I think Mike and Reed and Madison and Hope and Rachel made the most of their time in sacrificing their time to go to Vanuatu and to the Honduras. And I think our job is to make the most of our time so that we can do all things that have to do with Christianity people, so we can support efforts like this. So again, the contribution this morning, $1,878 for Brother Rimberto. Thank you for your generosity. I just think we need to remember these things. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to turn it over to our song leader, but Natalie reminded me that I forgot to finish a story, so I have to finish the story, okay? You'll forgive me for taking just one more minute of time. I forgot to tell you about the poo-poos, which is the Vanuatu word for trumpet. They were doing something that they'd never done on any of my previous trips, where they had a circumcision ceremony, where they took 8 or 10 or 12 boys, not little boys, like 4 to 8 years old, and they would, at the beginning of their winter, our summer, so June to August, they would go away, and they could not be around a woman for the whole summer. And they would circumcise these boys, and they would live in the village together, and it's a big deal in their culture. And at the end of the summer, they have what we would call the big giant barbecue, where there's just more lap than you can possibly imagine. But one of the ways that they would keep the women away is with these poo-poos. Okay? They had these giant conch shells. Okay? This is to tell you how different the culture was. And about 5 o'clock in the morning, they would start blowing on these conch shells when the little boys would come out and they would get them a bath. I can see what they're thinking. The women are still in bed. Let's just make them get up early. There's no chance of any woman coming around these boys. And they would start blowing these things. And it was just echoing throughout. One of the ladies that came from St. Louis on this, I thought she was going to go find those conch shells and break them on the earth. So I forgot to tell you about the trumpet story. It was a very unique experience. Reed and I, we got to go over there and see the boys. I'll tell you about that later. For obvious reasons, you can come ask me about that later. It was a very unique experience that was just something like watching the Discovery Channel. and we got to experience it. So let me turn it over to these guys. We're going to have one song, I Know That My Redeemer Lives. If you haven't had a chance to take communion today, you can make your way through this door and back to the